Okay, so we are nearing the end of mishnat sofrim. We're up to the letter taf. Okay, so we'll take a look first with the Mishnah Brura here in the Os V'Hadar edition. So he says, "O taf yehe gaga im regel yamin kmo dalid." Okay, this we'll see is one of the differences between the Sephardi and the Ashkenazi spelling, but the letter taf is comprised of a dalid, according to the Ashkenazi version anyway. You see here, this section of the taf is like a dalid. It's got the roof, which comes out straight. It doesn't curve like a reish, and it juts out a little bit to the right here on the upper right corner. And then you have the leg that comes down, not at the end, but a little bit before the end, like in a dalid. So that's the top and the right-hand side of the taf. ורגל שמאל, יש שעושים בתוך התף כעין וו הפוכה, ויש שעושים כעין דלת קטנה הפוכה. So he brings here two minagim, how to do the left leg of the taf. One is to do it in upside down vav. You see that it comes down and it curves. And the other custom is to do it like a small dalid. It's not a full dalid, but again, the difference is that it comes down, juts out a little bit, and it comes out squared at the bottom corner here of the left leg. Okay, so again, it's a dalid plus either an upside down vav or an upside down small dalid. That are the two options how it can be done. Yeah, here they bring the source that there are sources for each one. ורגל שמאל יגיע למעלה בגג, כי כל האותיות צריכות להיות שלמות גוף אחד. Okay, the left leg must touch the roof. Okay, because again, it's one whole letter. So the letters that are whole cannot be broken up. They have to all be connected. And except for the two letters that have the disconnect, and they must be disconnected, and that's the kuf and the hey, of course. ימין יהיה קצר, שאם יהיה ארוך, שמא תדמה לתינוק דלא חכים ולא טיפש לפי פשוטה. In other words, you have to make sure that the right leg doesn't go down too far, because if the right leg will extend far down beyond the left-hand side, you couldn't end up looking like a pace of feet. Like, for example, if you take a look at this picture, it doesn't exactly look like a pace of feet, because the issue is that the left part of the leg goes to the left instead of to the right. But if you can sort of see it, it becomes more similar to a pace of feet if the right-hand leg will extend beyond the left leg. Okay? וימשיך לה הרגל בתוך התף, כדי שיהיה סוף רגלה השמאלי כנגד סוף גגה, ולא בולט סוף הרגל לחוץ, כדי שיכול להסמיך עליה אות אחרת מלמעלה. What is he talking about here? What he's talking about here is that you want the taf, both the roof and the taf and the leg of the taf, to end at about the same place. So, what can happen? If, let's say, you'll do like this, where you start the left leg of the taf at the end of the roof, right, like in this picture, it still looks like a taf. It's fine from that perspective. The problem is that if you started here, then when you take the curve on the bottom to the left, this will stick out much beyond the roof. And then when you write the next letter, you'll have to put the next letter, start the next letter here on the bottom next to the leg of the taf, but on the top, it will be far away from the taf. So it sort of doesn't create a good alignment in terms of the spacing between the letters, because then I will have an uneven spacing, a larger spacing between the letters on the top and then on the bottom. So how do you do it? So instead, you begin the leg of the taf not at the end of the roof, but a little bit before the end of the roof. So you bring it down, you curve it, and then when it comes out to the bottom, it's basically, whether you do it like a vav or a dalid, upside down vav or an upside down dalid, it basically ends pachot o yoter, more or less where the roof ends, and then the spacing between the letters will remain consistent both on the bottom and on the top. Okay. Now, for that reason as well, he says, also, the roof, you shouldn't extend it too far. In other words, like you see in this picture, what happened in this picture? The roof went too far beyond. So now you'll have to start the next letter on the top here, And then on the bottom, you'll have a large spacing between the letters. So that's why you want the roof and the bottom leg to end more or less at the same point. So you don't want the roof extending too far, and you don't want the leg extending too far. In other words, so don't get fancy. When you curve down the left, you get your motion going, and then it gets too far beyond. You want to keep it even, both the top and the bottom. Okay? He says, ובדיעבד, אם גגה עוברת להלאה מרגלה והרגל באמצע, דינה כמו נתבאר לעיל באותי. So if, let's say, you did do it too far, then you can, just as we saw by a hay, if it went too far beyond the leg, then you can just scrape off the end here, okay, to make it even. It's not a problem of chak tochot, because you already have the full shape of the letter. I'm just taking off the extension of it. I'm not creating the shape of the letter by erasing. I already have the shape of the letter. I'm just removing the extra part, which is what I'm trying to get rid of. אם עשה רגל השמאלי קצר כיוד קטנה הפוכה בתוך התף, יש לומר שנשתנה כתמונת פ' פשוטה פסולה. Okay, this is a little bit difficult for me to understand. But he says as follows. This is, let's say you made the left leg too short. In other words, instead of making it like a vav or a dalid, you made it very small like a yud. Okay, like an upside down yud. So he says this is pasul. Why? Because now it ends up looking like a pei sofit. Okay? Now they explain here in the explanation that the logic of this is follows. L'chora, you look at it, it doesn't look at all like a pei sofit. Why not? Because in the pei sofit, the yud comes down and curves inside. And here it's curving outside. But they say it doesn't really matter because in the pei sofit, theoretically, even though it's supposed to curve inside, it could also curve outside. Again, I don't really understand it so much because if you remember when we go back and we learned the pei sofit as well, I think we can see it. There he said if you do it, let's see if I can find it. Yeah, here in this picture, where you did the pei sofit with the left part curving outside. Okay. Said here that it's puzzled because it ends up looking like a taf. Yeah, he says here, גם ייזהר שלא תהיה הנקודה הפוכה לצד חוץ כזה, כדי שלא תידמה לתף. So here he said not to do it because it will end up looking like a taf. So he doesn't really say here it would be pasul. I don't know. Anyway, what I mean is as follows. I think I understand why not to do it because it will end up looking slightly more like a pei sofit. But at the end of the day, I don't think anybody would read it like a pei sofit. So I'm just a difficult understanding why the Mishnah rules that it's pasul if you would do this. He says, "Afilu im agad rachav kiflaim kiyarech." In other words, even if you'll make the roof twice as long as the right-hand leg, in which case it definitely cannot be a pei because a pei has to be the opposite. That the right leg is twice as long as the roof, right? He says it still looks like a pei pshuta. Why? The pei pshuta ain't shiur ragla. Pei pshuta doesn't really have a shiur for how long it should be. רק לכף פשוטה יש שיעור לרגליים כפליים כגג, כדי שלא תדמה לריש או לדלת. It's only by a calf that we really have, even though a pei is supposed to be twice as long, in other words, that the right leg is supposed to be twice as long in the roof, that's sort of lechatchila, but it's not me'akiv. Only by a calf we have this idea that it really must be quite long so that it doesn't end up looking like a rish or a dalit. Anyway,
I just want to say, I could really imagine that why he means the pace of it. I don't know. I've seen some mezuzot, which are written in such a small letter that really, if there's a tiny difference in the back, it just looks like the coming down on the left side of the tav, more like not like a leg, but much more like a little bump, like by the pace of it. If you just think about the Frankrule, the way the newspapers pay is printed, it's not unlike in a by us, it's usually coming. It's a vav hafucha, right? Just a shorter one in the pay. But in newspapers, it's more like a little bump that has a little thing. So I think it's that it does make. I mean, somewhat. You're right that it doesn't necessarily look like, but I think it could be.
You're saying the bump is where, in the taf or in the pay, Sophie?
No, if you take a look at the regular printed, like any newspaper pay, a base of it, or how does the pay look like? They don't do the inner part as a really like a vav hafucha or yeah, over there as well. Just you need a little bit of a. Let me just try to make a big pay. Sorry, pay. I don't know.
Frank rule print, you're saying?
Yeah, Frank rule, for example. I don't find now on the, but even if it just you know, it's a regular Times New Roman. It's let's blow this up. I don't know if I can share the screen.
You should be able to.
Yeah. Here, this pay.
Yeah.
You see, they make the inner part more like a bum.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. I don't have a franc rule. Maybe I do. Just a second. Franc rule. Yeah. No. Franc rule. So many fonts.
Yeah, here you have it.
Yeah, well, sorry, yeah, franc rule.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, so I don't know. It looks much more like I don't know.
I think
Sometimes it's really like a big blob, like a little circle inside.
let me see. Yeah. The Frank rule. You're talking about a regular pay?
Actually, both. It doesn't make so much of a difference. In, let's see, this type of font. No, this is more our type of font. What is it? Yeah. No, these are more modern, and they're actually trying to imitate more the actually very nice Lumiere newer fonts are yeah, this type. You see this little leg on the left?
Oh.
This is very common.
Okay, so it's got something going to the left as well.
Yeah, in printed versions. This is really usual.
Interesting. Why do they do that?
I don't know. It's just
Hey, I don't know. Maybe I guess maybe I don't know. Maybe there were other ways of doing the peso feed, and that's why it ends up looking like that. I mean, that's what they're trying to say, that theoretically the peso feed, you could have the yud hooking the other way, and that's why the taf could end up looking like a peso feed.
yeah.
Okay, I don't know. I just have a hard time imagining it, but
Yeah.
anyway, that's what he says. Let's keep going. אם עשה רגל הטף קו שווה ולא בולט סופו לחוץ, אין אל סימן ל"ב that it's פסול. Okay, here he made it more like a chet. In other words, the left leg is coming down, but doesn't curve out to the left at all. So then that really doesn't look like a taf now. Okay, so that is pasul. אם לרגל הימני של תו נפסק ואין בו רק אם לא יוד, כשר. Here the right, they don't put a picture of it, but if the right leg, I don't know if you just imagine it, if let's say take a taf and the right leg is the one that's shorter, then that's kasher, as long as it at least has the length of a yud, because then it still ends up looking, it still looks like a taf. It doesn't look like any other letter. In other words, it's only if the left leg cuts short that it can end up looking like a pesofit. But if the right leg is cut short as long as it has the minimal of a length of a yud, then that's kosher. ואין בביאור הלכה בסימן ל"ב, הערנו שם, even though I don't need to show it to a תינוק, אם הראינו לתינוק והתינוק לא קרא לאור, צריך עיון בזה. Okay, sometimes you have a situation that it's not that usually when do we use a tinok? We use a tinok when we're concerned that it might end up look like another letter. So then if the tinok reads it like the letter that we have, we say fine, it still looks like this letter. It didn't end up looking like another letter. The question is, what happens as follows? What happens if it doesn't end up looking like another letter, but the tinok is simply unable to read it? So that's what he says here in Sarah Hiyun. Whether the fact that the tinok was unable to read it as a letter, he just says, I don't know what letter that is, whether that would pasul, or a tinok can only pasul if it actually ends up looking like a different letter. Okay, that's what he says, that's Sarah Hiyun on this point. Okay, he has some more general comments here. Before we get to that, let's do the Sephardi version. So, the first difference is, we saw in the Ashkenazi version, the roof and the right leg is like a dalid. In the Sephardi, it's like a reish. The left leg in the Sephardi version is more like a vav. In other words, it comes down, curves, and then goes to the left. Okay. Here they say, interesting, if you make a very thin vav, then it's kosher. If they have the case, I'm not sure what they mean here. He says, "V'afi masa רגל בולט אלא שהתחילה בליטה מהאלכסון מראש הרגל והוא כעין משולש פסול." In other words, let's say you made it more like a triangle shape, the left leg, that's also no good. In other words, it has to sort of come down thin and then stick out, not to be like a triangle type shape like they have in this picture. Some actually lechatchila, they brought here in some old Sifrei Torah, they lechatchila made the left leg longer than the right leg so that it won't end up looking like a pesofi, like you see here in this picture. They say here that some Sifrei Torah Yeshanim lechatchila did it that way. Interesting. Okay, but the standard way of doing it is that they're just even, both the right leg and the left leg, not one any more longer than the other. Okay, he has a few. See in Chabad. Oh, if you want to go into the Chabad one. So here we have, this is the Ashkenazi staff, the Dalit and the Sephardi, where it's more like a reish. And the Chabad one is more like the Ashkenazi one with the Dalit. So the little games here on the edges. Okay, let's continue some general ha'aros of the Mishnah Berurah on the letters. He says, "Kol עוד שיש בספק שמא אין בשיעור כראוי, בעניין שהיא פסולה, שמא אין צרותה עליה בעניין שהיא פסולה, מראים לתינוק." In other words, anytime we have a safek, whether, let's say, it's long enough, let's say a vav, is it long enough, is it a short vav, does it still look like a vav? Or, let's say we have a kaf needs to be rounded, not squared, but if you have a safek, whether it's rounded or squared, in all these cases, marin letinok. In other words, if we know it's a shinui tzura, as we said, the tinok doesn't help, because a shinui tzura passes the letter. That's simply not the shape of the letter. So we use a tinok either when we're concerned that it might end up looking like another letter, or that we have some sort of safek, whether we have a shinui tzura or not. Then בסעיף כ"ה באיזה דבר מועיל תיקון ולא נחשב שעות נחשבת כלא סדרן. As we said many times, even if we have a problem in the letter, as long as it's read correctly, it doesn't create a problem of shelo kesidran, and therefore we are able to correct it, again, providing that the correction can be done without erasing the letter. אם יש הפסק באותיות הפשוטות, כגון ו' ונ' פשוטה וכדומה, ויש הפסק באורך האות, וצריך להראות לתינוק, צריך לכסות לו מה שלמטה. In other words, sometimes you have a break in the middle of the letter, right? So let's say I have a nun sofit and I have a break in the middle of the letter. So I can only count the letter from what's above the break and beyond. But the question is, does that still look like a nun sofit? Is it long enough, or has it now turned into a vav? So I need to show to a tinok. But if I'll show to the tinok together with the part that's beyond the break, he'll read it all as one letter, even though it's not, because there's a break in the middle. So he says, what do you need to do? He says, צריך לכסות לו מה שלמטה. So you need to cover what's beneath it when you show it to the tinok, so that he won't use the bottom part to assist him to fill in that the top part is really a vav or a nun or whatever it was, and he'll only look at the part which is above the break. וכל שכן, אם נשאר רושם החלודה למטה, ולכולי עלמא מודים דצריך לכסות לפי שהתינוק ייתן לצרף זה לא. In other words, sometimes you don't have any ink left on the clef, right? You see this, you can see this especially in some old Sifrei Torah, that essentially the ink is gone entirely, and all you have is some sort of impression that was left on the clef by the rust, right? Because if you were talking about iron gall ink, it rusts after a while and turns red. So he says that's not considered that anything is written there at all, but nevertheless, it could affect the tinok to read it as the letter that it's really supposed to be. So therefore, in that situation, also you have to cover up that sort of rust remnant on the clef and only show the tinok what's above. I think sofrei stam, they have some sort of techniques. In other words, one way you could do it is obviously just take a piece of paper and cover it, but I think they have some other methods as well to sort of chalk on it or something when they're covering up to show it to a tinok. So that in the WhatsApp group that I participated in, they were speaking about that. Imagine if you're the child of a sofrei stam, you're getting a lot of questions. At some point, you might become too bucky. They'd have to passel you and get a different child. Okay, now he has some rules of mukaf gil from the Pri Megadim. Okay, this is stuff we studied already, but it's good review. He says, תחילת הכתיבה צריך שתהיה האות מוקף גביל בכל צדדים של האותיות. Okay, as we said, mukaf gvil again means that a letter needs to be surrounded by parchment. So it could be, you could have a problem of mukaf gvil either because the letter is touching another letter, so it's not surrounded by parchment, it's surrounded by ink. You could also have a problem mukaf gvil if you have a hole in the clef, in which case, again, if the letter will run all the way to the hole, then again, it also won't be, part of the letter will not be surrounded by clef because it's hitting basically air, because there's a hole in the clef. So by mukaf gvil, we have a difference between when you first write it and later on. Lechatchila, the halacha of mukaf gvil, as we'll see, it's only ma'akif b'diavad if it wasn't mukaf gvil when you initially wrote. Okay, so that's why he's emphasizing here tchilat haktiva. It must be mukaf gvil on all sides of the letter. It can't even one part of the letter which is touching a nekev or another letter. Then that's not considered mukaf gvil. ואפילו בקבוצה של יוד שמאלי, you have to be makpid that it's mukaf gvil, because again, we saw קבוצה של יוד, מחלוקת Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam, is that referring to the quotes on the right part, where the yud comes down, or is it referring to a small quotes that you need to do on the left yud? We actually do two quotesim on the left, both going to the top and the bottom. So even though the קבוצה של יוד, you don't have to have it according to Rashi, לפירוש רבנו תם, דפסקו כבתי רוב הפוסקים, מן התורה, דכתיבו, so according to Rabbeinu Tam, that we hold like him, that we need to have a kutzah shel yud on the left side, so that also has to be mukaf gvil. And he says that this halacha of mukaf gvil is udin zeh shetzarich shtiyeh mukaf gvil u'min haTorah, dichtivu chtavtam sheyeh ktiva tama. So that's the source for mukaf gvil, that the writing needs to be complete. And how do you make the writing complete if it's completely surrounded by clef? Because again, sort of, I think the idea is as follows, as we spoke in the past. How is writing? You always have, or normally you you have the surface upon which you write, which is like the background to the writing. And then you have, when you have ink on parchment, which is the parchment. And then we have the ink, which is the writing which is placed on it. And the way the writing becomes visible is that you can clearly define the writing on its background. So that's why that's the importance of the mukaf vil, that the letters will have a complete white background or glass background behind them. And on top of that, the ink, and that's what makes the writing complete. Also, the letters that have an internal, I mean, all letters have some internal thing. So also the internal part of the letter, like for example, he says the chalala ot bet. In other words, the whole internal part of the letter on the inside of the letter, they also need to be mukaf vil there, not just on the outer side. He brings here that some the bishat adchak you could be lenient on it because there are poskim that say that on the inside of the letter it does not need to be mukaf vil on the outside. He says ויש להחמיר דאפילו מצד אחד בפנים אינו מוקף vil פוסל כי מבחוץ זה לא כתב שמקל בזה. But he says לכתחילה you should be מחמיר that even if on one part of the inside it's not mukaf vil, like for example there's a hole there, you should be machmir on it. But again, as I mentioned, he does say that b'shat atzfak you could rely on the lenient poskim on mukaf vil inside. However, כל זה בתחילת הכתיבה. אבל אם לאחר שנכתב ניקב או אכלו החברים בתולעת כאשר אפילו אם רק מבחוץ. In other words, what we said in mukaf vil passos is only if it was that way when the sofer initially wrote it. But if the nekev was created later on, something made a hole in it, then it doesn't pass, and it's kasher. However, he says, but if you can fix it, then you should fix it. So even if a hole is made, the letter is still fine. It's just a problem mukaf vil. The way sometimes you can correct it is by you erase a little bit of the letter where it touches the hole, and then that way you make it mukaf vil. Okay, finally he says, ודע עוד, דתיקון מועיל, אפילו אם נכתב לכתחילה בלא היקף גביל, כגון כף פשוטה בלי היקף, והוא הדין שאר אותיות, בין באורכן או בעוביין, אם תישאר צורת עליה גם אחר גרירתו מוחק וגורר, ולא הווי שלא כסדרן בזה. In other words, even if I did have a problem with mukaf vil when I initially wrote it, if I'll be able to erase it and make it mukaf vil while still preserving the shape of the letter, then you can be metakin in that way. Because if you're just correcting to make it mukaf vil, it's not a problem of chaktochot, because I already have the shape of the letter. It's just a problem of another halakha of mukaf vil. And it's also not a problem of shelo kesidran, because again, shelo kesidran applies only if I don't have the shape of the letter. Here I have the shape of the letter, I just have a problem mukaf vil, so I can correct it by erasing. I can correct it even if I've written onwards. And this is one of the most common things that I see that sofrim have, that sometimes their letters just touch a speck. So if they just touch a speck, it's not a problem of a shinui tzuva, right? Because you can clearly read the letter, it's just barely touching a little bit. Only if you look very closely, you see that it's touching. It's just a problem of mukaf vil. So then you are allowed to just erase the part that it's touching, separate it, make it mukaf vil, and then that's kasher, and there's no problem, no chaktochot, and no shelo kesidran. Very good. Any questions or comments on this? Okay, shkoyach, that was quite an achievement. So
thank you so much.
The mishnat sofrim, and B'ezrat Hashem will continue a few more siman in Hilchot Tefillin to finish up.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you.